everyone. Welcome. Happy to see this is going to be a conversation revolving around our academy camp in Timișoara, which was about community development through creative action. It was the fourth academy camp that we held on site and also hybrid with the lead trainer, François Matarazzo, who's here with us today to have this conversation with our friend and leader for this fifth academy camp, Jordi Pasqual. So without further ado, let's go. Jordi, thank you so much again for having taken up the role of moderating this conversation. I think that everybody will agree with me that the feeling from yesterday is extremely positive, that the conversations were interesting, relevant, and gave us all food for thought. I actually took a screenshot yesterday afternoon of a comment from the team of Braga 27, because I was very touched by that comment. They said, thank you so much for these sessions. One of these sessions is so much more worth than reading 100 bit books, something like that. So I thought it was really very nice. Thank you, Braga, for that comment. But I do think that it conveys the feeling that we all had yesterday during the day. So thank you again, Jordi, François, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. Muchísimas gracias. I have to say that today's keynote speaker, François Matarazzo, is one of the persons that has influenced more my career. I admire what he's done. I admire what he's doing. So I am delighted to share a conversation with him. François has worked in community arts since 1981 as an artist, as a researcher, as a teacher, policymaker, and writer. His report, published in 1997, Use or Ornament, established very influential concepts in cultural policy. Between 2018 and 2015, he produced a series of books on undervalued areas of cultural life. Under those books were published under the collective title Regular Marvels. And his last book, the book he published in 2019, A Restless Art, How Participation Won and Why It Matters, is also extremely interesting for all those that support cultural policies from different angles. He's worked in more than 40 countries, held honorary professorships in the UK and Australia, and he is the leader of a website, Parliament of Dreams. François, I am saying in public things that you know. A pleasure to have you in this fifth academic camp in the third session, and to talk with you on community development through creative action. My first question will be very, very basic, but I think it is important to set the foundations and to be pedagogical with this question. What is participatory art?
Thank you, Jordi. It's a good question, and because it opens up really the whole question of the changing relationship between professional artists, producers, and societies. And if you will allow me just to go back a moment, the reason, the subtitle of the book you mentioned, A Restless Art, the subtitle was How Participation Won and Why It Matters. And it was a slightly cheeky statement, but it came out of as you said, I began working in this field more than 40 years ago. At the time, people who worked in what we then called community arts, and I still do, were seen by most people in the arts world as being disreputable. If we were doing this work, we were either politically radical or social workers or just not very good artists. And so if you like, the earlier part of my working life was really part of a struggle for what the place of art in society was and who was entitled to define what art was for and what its standards of quality were. In the period, really in the last 2 decades, since the turn of the millennium, I would say that participatory art has become very fashionable, and it's become fashionable under many different names. Sometimes it's a spectrum of things, but everything from socially engaged practice to outreach and education to audience development work. I have preferred to use the term participatory art as a big umbrella term for all of these different practices, because largely nobody cares about what socially engaged practice is except the people who are doing it. The people who might be involved in that, most of these art world terms, I think, are incomprehensible and off-putting. So participatory art I've settled on as a generic term. And for me, it means something very simple and straightforward. And it's the definition that I gave in the book. So I describe participatory art as the creation of art by professional and non-professional artists. And let me just say two quick footnotes to that. One is that participatory art means the creation of a work of art. There is lots of time when professional artists work with non-professionals and they're not involved in the creation of art. Lots of audience development work, lots of education work, lots of teaching involves that cooperation, but the purpose is not to create a work of art. That purpose matters because if the purpose is to create a work of art, then the people involved are involved in the same act in the world as professional artists. So that's the first thing. The second footnote is, in thinking this through, I settled in my own mind on the phrase professional and non-professional artists rather than what's much more common, which is to talk about artists and communities or artists and ordinary people, or there's a whole range of sometimes euphemisms, I could say, for the people that the professional artists want to work with. The reason that I think professional and non-professional artists is a better explanation is, first of all, because if you are involved in the creation of a work of art, then you are an artist in exactly the same way as if you're involved in a marathon, you're a runner. There may be professional runners who will be trying to break the world record. You might simply be trying to finish the marathon, but you're all involved in the same thing. And that is important because it recognizes the act of creation as being important, but it does recognize there is a difference between a professional and a non-professional. And that's a difference we can talk about, but perhaps the most important thing is that they bring, professional artists and non-professional artists bring different resources to the act of art making and have different reasons for being involved in it and have different social identities. So that professional, non-professional thing is important. It's the one thing I would say is that it's not about whether you're paid or not. Most poets don't get paid to write poetry. They get paid to do other things. If they had to live on what they earned by writing poetry, they would be very hungry. So that question of being paid is, I think, irrelevant. It's much more to do with your relationship with what you're doing and how your social world recognizes that relationship for you.
Your answer is a box with several questions, issues we can develop in the conversation. A turning point in say that if I may, the paradigm of cultural policies. You mentioned 1981. You mentioned turn of the century. Does it correspond to the, say, at least in the academic or in the group of people that discuss on cultural policies, does it correspond to a change of paradigm between cultural democratization or the democratization of culture and cultural democracy? Is that so?
It is and it isn't. So just to be clear, the policy of cultural democratization emerged in the post-war European sphere, in the period of Reconstruction and the period of the establishment of welfare states in response to the crisis of the Second World War. So welfare states established health services, education services, employment services, and mostly they, not all, but mostly they also established cultural services with the idea that access to culture was part of what citizens should have, in the same way they should have access to health, access to education. That came under challenge in the late 1960s, as so much of the post-war settlement came under challenge. And artists and other activists, campaigners, saw this first post-war policy of cultural democratization as paternalistic, because they were saying, it seemed to be saying, all that matters is that people have access to theatre, to dance, to music. They don't have any culture of their own. They simply need to be able to go and enjoy and admire the great art that others create. What emerged in the 1960s and 70s took the name cultural democracy, and its argument was that first, culture was multidimensional, it was diverse, it was multipolar, and that everyone in society was not only able to consume culture, but to produce it, that everyone had an equal voice in that. Those two ideas have continued to be opposed in cultural policy. And to some extent, I think it's rather unhelpful. Again, partly because the concepts are not well understood even by many people who work in the cultural sector. They're certainly not understood by most ordinary citizens. Secondly, they actually have much older roots than that. In some of what I've written, I take the roots back to the invention of fine art in the late 18th century as part of the Enlightenment project. And I say that because as soon as you invent fine art, you automatically invent not fine art. You invent, and you have to create a whole bunch of concepts like folk art or traditional art or indigenous art or Japanese art or whatever it may be, popular art, commercial art, that are all subordinate to the elite fine art. But already by the early 19th century, and the emergence of industrial society, some working class communities were creating associations to build their own forms of culture and access to culture and education, and seeing culture as a form of empowerment. So I just say that because this long view, I think, is important to what's happened during the course of my professional life. And this is, I'm on very thin ice, and I'm sure that many people will find some of what I'm saying completely wrong. But I would argue, I believe that fine art, the invention of fine art, created an extraordinary, it was a bit like an atomic explosion, created a shockwave of energy in the artistic field, in Europe particularly, that has transformed not only art and culture, but our lives with it. But I think that, like an atomic explosion, its half-life has been diminishing. The half-life of that energy has been diminishing, and the fine art world, the elite art world, has been losing its energy, its value, its power has been diminishing, particularly in the last 50 years, under pressure of democratization, of our increasing prosperity, of our the rise in education and leisure, and consequently a change in power relations between those who were largely the producers of art for most of the 250 years since the Enlightenment, to today, when the production of art is far more, it's a far more level playing field. And just to finish this thought, I think that is why cultural institutions in the last 20 or 30 years have sought to respond to cultural democracy, to the claim that everyone can make art, that art and culture is diverse and multipolar. They've sought to respond to that because they recognize, without necessarily always understanding it, the change in social fabric that we are seeing, and they recognize that it presents an existential threat to the dominant elite cultural institutions that were created on the model of 19th century ideas. The difficulty, I think, and it's one of the reasons why those two concepts of cultural democracy and cultural democratization are not always very helpful, is because the rhetoric of cultural institutions today is increasingly the rhetoric of cultural democracy, but the practice remains the practice of cultural democratization. So they are, I think, often dressing up activities and ideas and commitments which are in effect a marginally adjusted continuation of their access policies of the last 70 years, but they are presenting them in more popular and radical language and forms. But they are not yet ready, mostly, they are not yet ready to accept the implication of cultural democracy, which is a genuine democratic sharing of power about and authority about cultural value, cultural production, and cultural engagement.
It was a very, very good explanation, and I share with you. I celebrate you invite us, to the archaeology of the concepts and to the beginning of the processes that most of us feel they are natural, and well, they are not. They are not. It is very good to see when they appeared first, who promoted those concepts, what impact those concepts have in power, in sharing power, scrutinizing how power is used. So I enjoyed it very much, this long explanation. What is the relation, what is the difference between community art and participatory art, Francois? You defined participatory in the first question, and I presume that it is not exactly the same as community art. Can you briefly explain the difference of these two concepts, and we'll finish with this more conceptual part with this question.
Thanks, Jody. This can be shorter. So for me, participatory art is this big field in which people can do all sorts of things and have different relations, but in terms of purpose and the balance of power between the professionals and the non-professionals. Community art, as I first understood it and learned about it in the early 1980s, and as I still think about it, it stands on Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says that everyone has the right to participate in the cultural life of the community. It goes on to say, and to enjoy the arts and some other things, but it's the participate in the cultural life of the community that matters to me. If that is true, if we accept that this is a human right, then community art is about trying to ensure that people have access to that right, that they can participate in the cultural life of the community. And participate in the cultural life of the community is not limited. It means they can participate in any way they choose and they see, otherwise it has no meaning. What follows for community art, as for participatory art, is that it must stand on a basis of equality between the professional and the non-professional artists, because if they are working on a basis of human rights, they have an equal right to be participating in the creation of artwork together. No one has more say in what is going to be produced except through the democratic negotiation of working together and deciding what makes sense. And one consequence of that is that with community art, you really cannot determine, as a professional artist or as a funder or as a commissioner, you cannot determine in advance what is going to be produced, to what standard or how, because if you're doing that, you are taking away from the non-professional artists who are not yet involved any right to shape the project. So for me, the simplest difference might be that participatory art can be, and indeed sometimes is, like performing an orchestral score. You know, you have to follow what's written on the paper in advance by the composer. You have some scope to interpret it in your own way, but largely, if you're a choir member and you've agreed to sing Handel's Messiah, you can't introduce an aria by Queen in the middle of it. But in community art, you're really involved in improvisation. It's like jazz, it's improvised music. You don't know what it's going to sound like until you find out who's in the room. So maybe you're going to have 3 bass players, a drummer, and a clarinetist, and that's going to be difficult to play Handel's Messiah with that makeup. But you will find whatever it is those musicians want to play. So I think for me that's the core difference. One is following a score. The other is an improvisation, and because it's improvisation, for me it's much more rewarding and exciting and empowering.
Thank you, Francois. That was clear. I have questions that are related to to the academic camp that you led in Timișoara in November 2021. I have questions related to how a European capital of culture should support participatory art. But I'm sure that Mercedes, Sylvain, Cristina may have questions right now on what you have said. I saw Cristina clapping when you explained the appearance of fine arts as a nuclear explosion. So feel free, Mercedes, Cristina, Sylvain, do you have a comment or a question?
Yes, no, I was very impressed by the presentation of François, and I see so many also connections with what Cristina said yesterday. And of course, the ECoC is often a tool for testing new practices. So I suppose that's where we could now, that's what we could discuss now, how through an ECoC here, you can introduce changes in the way you share the power with a greater number of stakeholders.
It's a very good question, and is the heart of every ECoC project and that I have seen. I have mixed feelings. I sometimes wonder whether the most creative and productive part of, and here I'm going to be heretical, whether the most creative and productive part of the ECoC process is the bidding process rather than the delivery process. Because in the bidding process, there is a blank canvas and everyone brings their hope and ideas into that discussion to imagine not just what is a cultural program, but what is the place where they live and what could it be and what do they want it to be? And that can be really, really fruitful. Of course, once there's a bid book, I think that ECoCs run into some very difficult tensions that are inherent in the project, because they need to try to satisfy some very competing desires. There are the desires of the political leadership of the place, which may be more focused on economics and social change. There are the desires of the artistic leaders of the place who may feel that their reference points are more their artistic peers in other parts of Europe or indeed in other parts of the world. And there are the desires of local artists who, excuse me, there are the desires of local artists and communities who almost inevitably will feel that what's happening isn't what should be happening because it's not involving them in the way that they want or expect or need. And finally, there are the desires and interests of the people who don't feel connected with it at all for whatever reasons, but who live in the city. All of those desires are like a series of storms that the ECoC ship has to navigate its way through. And I say this with the greatest of respect. I think it's incredibly difficult to do that. And the only way that I think it can be done effectively is to keep talking to people and keep listening to people and being honest, trying to be honest in the ways that I'm being honest about those conflicting desires now, to say we do have to meet different visions and we will try to find ways of meeting some of those visions as far as possible. But it is it is a catalytic moment, the ECoC, and one of the understanding that it is catalytic in the sense that it brings the possibilities of change is the more important thing. But that's a much harder thing to get people to see, because what they'll see is what's in the program or what new structures have been created to around the bid or whatever. So yeah, I can only say I would never run. Not that anybody would ever ask me to run an ECoC, but if they did, I would never say yes.
But for François, I have a follow-up question, if I may. It's how you can connect participatory approaches with also the need to have a European dimension. Because I see not really a contradiction, but a huge difficulty in doing that.
It is, and I think okay, there are a number of things. Before I give my one answer, I'll just say hello to Ed Carroll in Kaunas, who's an old friend, and I'm going to go and see the community opera that this community in Kaunas has been working on in a neighborhood called Sunshine. I've been working on this community opera for 4 years, and interestingly, I'm not going to go and see it in Kaunas. I'm going to see it in Esch in Luxembourg, because for reasons I can't imagine, they've been invited to perform the community opera hundreds of kilometers away from the city, although both are capitals of culture. So there are paradoxes in this community engagement. For me, I think and this partly brings us back to what I was talking about in Timișoara. There are two ways of engaging communities and participation in ECoC programs, and to some extent they correspond to participatory art and community art, or to democratization of culture and cultural democracy. The first way, which most European capitals of culture do and do more or less well, is around access and involving local people in the high profile program. The second way is to create a program which is genuinely community owned and community organized and interested. And I almost think it needs to be that, because it needs to have its own logic, its own budgets, its own organization. Now, paradoxically, what I think you find can often happen, and I think this happened in the capital of culture in the Netherlands a few years ago. They did this very well, and they discovered, of course, that the community organized events are actually capable of being the most interesting to outsiders. I once, many years ago, came across an Australian definition of cultural tourism, which I really liked. And it said, cultural tourism is the art of participating in someone else's culture. And actually, what the community events can do is precisely to give people a more authentic experience. So yes, you can go to Timișoara and see a great opera, but you can see a great opera anywhere. But you can also go to Timișoara and see something in a neighborhood that gives you a sense of, actually, I've been in Romania, I've been in Timișoara, I've been in a small neighborhood that I would never otherwise set foot in. So I think the practical answer is to try to do both of those programs alongside each other, but understand them as being distinct and separate, and needing their own principles and values and budgets and ways of organizing.
François, I would like you to develop a little bit, if possible, on something that you referred to at the very beginning, the idea of authority. You mentioned authority, and I think that I don't know, I was reading an article yesterday evening, and you've made me think of this now this morning. The article argues that in the society in which we live, we are eroding this idea of authority, which means also taking responsibility for, and relates it to, in relation in particular to that double approach to the idea of freedom or liberty, positive and negative. One being the negative, you cannot impede me, prevent me from doing this or that. And the positive idea of liberty or freedom as expressed by Berlin, the fact that I can act. Could you please, tell us a little bit more about that?
That's a really big and important question. I don't believe that we are eroding authority. I think that there are times in human history when authority is more stable and times when it is less stable. And I think that the emergence of the democratization and the new technologies and the education that I've talked about as driving this, what I think is a historic change in the place of culture, is also changing and challenging authority and changing that. And the only parallel that keeps coming to me is the Reformation, and the translation of Christian scripture into local languages, making it available to people to read, to comment, and then to question. The precedent, unfortunately, is not good, because we know that we had the wars of religion. But because I'm a Democrat, all of my work is shaped by the idea that keeping people talking, keeping people in the same room, working together, and finding solutions to their problems and to their disagreements is the only way forward we have. It's often an unsatisfactory and a difficult and a painful way forward, and it often fails, but it's always better than the alternatives. When I talk about the diminishing power of fine art, I'm talking about that diminishing authority. It still has a lot of authority. I'm currently working on 3 community opera projects in a EU-funded Horizon 2020 research program, which is really interesting. It's the first time I've worked on opera, but if you like, acknowledging opera as the highest form of cultural authority, the highest. I think that there are things that are changing there, which are very positive, but there are also things that are ugly that we have to recognize, which is that state power, economic power, social power congregates around certain forms of art and culture, and they support each other, not always to the benefit of wider society. So some of that authority, I think, is rightly coming under challenge and needs to be rethought. But as I say, the only thing, the only effective good way of doing that is through democratic negotiation. Just a final thought. I mean, authority, it's always seemed to me to be very significant that authority and authorship have the same root. The author, who writes history? You know, we know the rather cynical cliche about history being written by the winners. This is why culture and power and history and are all muddled up together. We can see it in the war that is currently happening. The question of whose story is being listened to, whose story is being heard, and what happens if you control what people believe. None of this is easy, but it underlines how incredibly important it is that we create spaces in which those disagreements and alternative voices can be heard, but also that we don't fall into for instance, the free speech absolutism of a man like Elon Musk, proposing to return Donald Trump to his positions of power. I think, as I wrote yesterday in a blog post, it's much easier to believe in to be a free speech absolutist if you were born yourself with a golden megaphone. And lots of us, lots of the great majority of people were not born with any kind of platform. And that's what our work, I believe, in democratizing and making a cultural space more democratic is ultimately about making this cultural space more fair, more equal, and more honest.
That was very good. Great question, Mercedes, and great explanation, Francois. In Timișoara, you discussed the living heritage principles, and those principles are not new. They have 15 years of life, almost, a little bit more. Are they still useful? Where do they come from? And can you explain a little bit what are they about, and how they are important for European capitals of culture?
The Living Heritage Programme was first conceived in 1998 by the King Baudouin Foundation, which is a Belgian foundation. They wanted to work in heritage in the Western Balkans, in some places in a post-conflict, but in all places in a post-Soviet world. And they commissioned me to help conceive the program, and then later to help deliver it and do the capacity building. I faced two challenges in thinking about this program. Well, many, but two in particular. The first was that I had never been to Southeast Europe and had no experience of it, and consequently really wasn't in a position to know, and still less to tell people there how things could be done. The second was we were working in an area where there were very few resources, very little infrastructure, an area undergoing enormous social, political, and economic change. The question that I was asking myself is, how do you do community art when you don't have any community artists? And the answer was to work directly with communities. So the program actually ran from 2000 to 2005 in Bulgaria, what is now North Macedonia, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and in Romania. And during that time, we supported 140 projects, many of them, most of them, I would say, in remote and rural areas. And we supported them to do a very big range of cultural and heritage projects. So to create museums or restore museums, to work on festivals or around traditional culture, food, but also contemporary art, to work on natural heritage and many other things. So the Living Heritage Principles were 10 simple statements that I drafted following research I had done on community heritage projects in Northern and Western Europe. And they were simply tools for thinking. So if we were working with people who had no experience of running community heritage and cultural projects, we needed to give them some guidance on how this could be done. So to give you an example, the 10 principles, the first was sustainable economic development. That we were going into a situation where we were going to give somebody a grant that would be a one-off grant. I knew that there would be no further grants because there were no donors in those areas who would sustain a project long-term. Other principles were things like valuing volunteers, open and honest management. The last one was dig where you stand, which it was actually the motto of a project called the Living Archive in Milton Keynes in the UK, but I've subsequently learned that it was an idea developed by a very interesting Swedish writer called Sven Lindqvist in the 1960s. And it was about recognizing that wherever you are, there is cultural heritage of real value, and that working with your own resources was the most empowering thing you could do. Those principles, I think, worked really, really well. And when we did the evaluation, more than 90% of the projects that we supported achieved or exceeded the objectives they had set themselves at the beginning of the process. And indeed, I'm still in touch with people from that area. And one of my colleagues in the Living Heritage Programme, Yuri Volkovsky, I invited to talk to the Academy camp in Timișoara. He's now the Deputy Minister of Culture in Bulgaria. And the ideas in the Living Heritage Programme in Macedonia, particularly in Bosnia and in Bulgaria, were continued by our local partners who were absolutely essential to the programme. What I draw from this experience is that giving people understandable, relatable concepts that are of proven worth, even if they're as simple and as self-evident as sustainable economic development, is the way to help them shape and respond to their situation and their needs. And this is part of why in everything I do, I place a high priority on clarity and simplicity of the concepts that we use. And unless cultural professionals and others working on European capitals of culture can speak and offer ideas that are meaningful to people who don't work in culture, they will never be able to really engage communities. You have to find ideas and ways of working that make sense to the local inhabitants, to the residents of a neighborhood, that that are meaningful for them. And just a final thought on this to underline that, just back to the idea of dig where you stand. One of the phrases that came to me and I started using during the Living Heritage program is I was able to say to people, you are the world expert in your culture. I know nothing. I know nothing about the textile traditions of Avrig in Romania, or the Catholic dance traditions of Oresh in Bulgaria. What I know is about how to make projects work. You know about your culture. I'm just here to help you make the project that makes sense to you work. And that we found in the Living Heritage program was incredibly empowering, because of course they know how to make their culture sing, because it's what matters to them. All they need from people like me is some practical tools on how to organize things, or how to anyway, you get my drift.
I have copied to the chat the 10 principles, the link to the report published in 2005, and the reference. This is in the report of the academy camp. So if you want to have a look and to explore more, feel free. Happy that this is useful, and thank you for the great explanation again, Francois. I have two more questions. One is related to the Rome Charter, because you have been involved, Francois, in 2019 and 2020 in the writing of this document on the right to participate in cultural life, developing the concept of capabilities, providing with a nice frame to all kind of actors involved in cultural policy. So this would be one question, if you could explain a little bit more what is the Rome Charter, and another question would be on evaluation. And this is a difficult question. This is something that you also discussed in Timișoara. Some of the sentences, some of your statements in this talk already replied to how participatory art can be evaluated, but I would like to pose this question in a more explicit way. I am concerned we don't have much time. We have around 10 minutes, and then we will go to have a break. Feel free to answer one question. The other can come after the break.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to be brief. The Rome Charter, which we worked together on, was an attempt to answer that question that I already touched on. So we have an Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We all have the right to participate in the cultural life of the community. But what does that mean in practice? I can imagine there isn't a government in the world that would say it doesn't defend that right. But what that right means in Hong Kong, or in Alabama, or in Lyon is very, very different. So I wanted to think about what that meant, and the capabilities approach of Amartya Sen and Martin Nussbaum was very helpful in thinking that through. But I also wanted the charter to be something that would speak to people, because if we're talking about people's rights, if the first precondition, it seems to me, is that you understand what rights you have, what is being what you're entitled to. So I wanted the charter itself to not be more than a single sheet of paper, which we did do with some explanatory stuff behind it. But also I wanted it to be still clearer than that. And so using the capabilities approach, I proposed that in terms of what does participation in culture mean? What does my right to participate in the cultural life of the community means? I proposed that it means that I have the capability to discover culture, to enjoy culture, to create culture, to share it, and to protect it. Of course, what I mean by those 5 things is different to what any of you might mean by those 5 things, but at least we have a sense that if I believe I can do those things, then it's meaningful to say that I can participate in the cultural life of my community. And that idea of trying to simplify something to 5 single words, I thought was important in the sense of being able for cultural institutions and cities to make a commitment to their to local people about what they were offering. They can say to people, okay, I'm a museum, I'm a theatre, I'm a municipality. It's my job to ensure that you, as a taxpayer and a resident and somebody who is in my community, that you are able, through my work, to discover, enjoy, create, share, and protect culture. And what was very interesting about that process, it was thanks to UCLG, which was the principal sponsor with the City of Rome of the project. It was a genuinely global conversation that led to the refining and the development of those ideas. And it was really exciting to me to hear people in China, in Colombia, in Canada, using these concepts, these 5 words in the conversation that we were having, because it demonstrated to me how it can be that if you give people clear ideas and meaningful ideas, then it transforms the conversation that you can have about what happens. So I'll stop there, and I can say a few words about evaluation if you think it's useful after the break.
Yes. Let me also confirm that we in UCLG, we are extremely happy. We are extremely satisfied with the process that led to the approval, to the adoption of the Rome Charter. Let me mention the initiator of the charter, Luca Bergamo, former Councillor for Culture of City of Rome. And also let me explain that the Rome Charter is one of the main components of our Global Pact for the Future that we will suggest, we will invite local governments all over the world to adopt after it has been approved hopefully in our Congress in Daejeon in October this year. And the Rome Charter has this is a great document, partly because of your involvement, Francois. So thank you very much for being a substantial part of this important endeavor. Mercedes reminded me that I didn't give the floor to Cristina. I forgot. Sorry, Cristina. Are you ready now to take the floor briefly? Thank you. Let me also thank you, Sarah. Sarah is in the UCLG team, in charge of communication, and Chiara is also supporting this webinar from the InterArts team. We'll go now to Timișoara. We have Corina Bucea and Teodora Borgov. You both have a very tight schedule today. Thank you for being with us. Mulțumesc. You will have the floor for the next quarter of an hour to explain the relation between your work and what we have heard from Francois. To explain also, if you wish, briefly, the academic camp that it was held in autumn last year, and to explain what you're planning for next year, for the European Capital of Culture year. Thank you again, Corina. Corina is the expert in cultural education and mediation of the Timișoara 2023 curatorial team. And Teodora Borgov is the expert in community engagement and social inclusion in the same curatorial team. Thank you again, Teodora and Corina.
Thank you very much as well. It is a great honor to be presenting. Sometimes under the pressure of the preparation, it's hard to remember the times when we were also preparing during the candidacy and how important all the knowledge sharing was. Still, we try our best to present. Our presentation would be applied. It's coming from the experience we have in this process of becoming and holding the title as European Capital of Culture. I will start very briefly on the topic of community development. The candidacy of Timișoara was very much built around the idea of local development and community development. For this reason, the structure of the program was keeping in mind these aspects. We have structured our cultural program into, we imagined a journey of the citizen. This was the very basic idea in mind, a journey of the citizen through something else, a transformation. It was a clear purpose of a transformative process through culture. And then to make this more accessible, we imagined 3 territories. People, where we explored the part that is related to identity and memory and personal image. Then places. All our programs in the places territory have a very clear function of activating public spaces, discussing the relation between the city and its citizens, and coming quite deeply to topics as right to the city and who has the power to decide about the city and things like this. And then the third territory is called connections, and this is about the way we transcend our individual identity and local identity to strive to connect to global issues. To upgrade this understanding, it's not about only about our personal lives and aspirations. It's also this collective identity in a global context. That was our beautiful cultural program. Now, in terms of implementation, the issues where the reality comes, and the challenges that we went through were multiple. We will not complain. Each and every European capital of culture has this journey of coming from the enthusiasm and the energy of holding the title to the actual implementation. But in this implementation, where we focus, or the critical points that we have identified are in several directions. One, and here Corina will explain very well, is the actual capacity of the cultural operators to transmit these messages, these ideals that we have put in our candidacy. And this is done through the program that is at the center of our cultural program, and is called the Power Station. Together with the cultural operators, we are then going through the adding to the culture as usual additional elements, or strengthening the elements that are related to mediation and education and citizen outreach, which is a process that it has its own challenges in terms of managing expectations, especially from the political side. 1 year before the holding of the title, we are still explaining that the European Capital of Culture is not about mass events and big numbers and highlights, but it's this slower transformation and going into deeper issues. Nevertheless, we keep transmitting this message at all levels, and then we also and this is truly critical in these times of pressure. We keep the citizen in mind. Of course, the rush of the preparation is always tempting to focus, like, what will the international press will say about, how do we collaborate with this and that, how we, well, in these times of storming, at least my role is to constantly remind that this is a capital of culture that had by design the idea of the citizen in mind, and no matter how in a hurry and how much under pressure we are, we have to keep the effort of imagining what will be the actual experience and transformation for the people who live in the condominiums or at the outskirts of the city, or the marginalized groups, and so on. One thing is that we try to stay relevant for the times we live in. Our city is now is hosting refugees from the Ukraine, and it has this emotional turmoil related to the war that is on the very border of Romania. And the immediate response was to look in our cultural program the appropriate way to address this in a sensitive way. We have, for example, a program that is called Moving Fireplaces, which is already in 2016 was designed to address the migration and topics like Fortress Europe and displacement and so on. And now we include the stories, the researchers that are preparing the program for 2023 and 2022. They are already gently approaching the new Ukrainian community in the city and inviting them to share the stories, to be transformed also with the support of the local and Ukrainian artists. This was a very concrete example how we try to stay relevant of the very news of today.
Thank you. Welcome to Corina.
Thank you. So I'm an outsider to Timișoara. I joined the curatorial team this winter, actually. And of course, from our position in general as a curatorial team, and mine in specific terms, because I'm looking also at the ecosystem, and I'm looking at the way in which this ecosystem, the journey that it passed through already, and also what it still has to go through in the future. So when looking at this ecosystem, we are also looking at the metaphors, at the narrative, let's say, that an ECoC program usually builds upon, and that specifically Timișoara built upon. And of course, as always, the concept of a European capital of culture starts with kind of digging into the community's identity, specific traits, and exposing, kind of bringing to the surface the most defining traits, those that can really give eventually a sense of belonging to the local community to which this program is mainly addressed to, but also kind of sending a message and communicate something to the larger European community, whatever that means for each of us, let's say. So our main question when working with this program is also, how do you get back to that? How do you get back to the source of a program that builds and builds and grows and grows? And of course, it provides or creates a risky context to forget the source. So what is the source of this good story that the European Capital of Culture tries to make? But also, how do you make it visible and really palpable at the level of each citizen you can possibly reach? And one thing that I think one thing that the whole program of European Capital of Culture for Timișoara builds upon is, as Theodora mentioned, this metaphor of a journey. So putting this this journey in motion in a same way that the whole history of the city, or reflecting on how the whole history of the city has gone through its own journey. So I really like, and I think it's in these times of migration and a lot of mobility, or even more in the time of when we are looking at mobility in different ways after the pandemic. I think this metaphor of a journey is something that we can all relate to. Not one, or not a metaphor, not a journey itself without challenges, but it's definitely one in which what we know for sure is that we need to accompany the traveler. So this is, I believe, the role of of us, of all of us who have different roles, but who have this supporting role in this ecosystem, where of course the community is the final beneficiary, let's say, but where you also need the support structures in order to empower and to really, you know, bring some light from the community above. Another powerful metaphor that I think Timișoara builds on, and where it really looked at the sources of its identity, is this metaphor of light, as the city chose to also use the slogan, shine your light, light up your city. What I think it's also relevant is that in all these messages and in everything that we are building, there's a you. This you, and how do we address this you, is also one of our main, let's say, one of our main missions. When I say our, it's really the cultural ecosystem and all of the support structures that can empower and that can really create a basis for the cultural ecosystem. So what is maybe, and this will be just probably my last, let's say, reflection on a more general level, is that what is maybe more relevant on a broader context is that we are talking in the program, and we are talking a lot also in our, you know, daily conversations with people who are really doing the grassroots work in Timișoara about how programs like this need to build a certain confidence and a certain feeling of trust. And while what I really see in Timișoara is this feeling of trust which comes from the community to the cultural sector, because the cultural sector comes a lot from within the community. So there's this relationship and there's this feeling that things come from the grassroots level, and things can become big when you are really building on something from within, let's say. What I would say, and this made me also reflect a bit more spontaneously, let's say, starting from what Francois mentioned in his talk before, this tension, which starts from the same root, but this inevitable tension between author and authority, right? I really believe that somehow the ECoC program and what we are doing here has an important mission to protect the author, and not just protect the author from the authority, but also feed into and really provide a space for courage to be fueled, to be enriched, to be fed, let's say, not just between the community who are coming towards culture, and not just with this purpose that we are all, of course, taking upon us, of building this sense of confidence, this sense of trust, and this sense of courage that in a city like Timișoara you can really find in the whole identity that the community feels, or that the city builds on, but also transfer and also pay attention to the importance of the same courage inside culture. I really believe that we are now living times where we need to grow this from within more than ever before. And if again, the relationship between the community and the cultural sector is something that has been growing and has been, we've been able to make it happen, and the cultural ecosystem has been able to fuel this in long processes, again, not without challenges. I think we still need this support and to enrich and to, how to say this, to exercise this courage in the cultural sector. I believe this is more than ever in this times of where we are experiencing a lot of gaps and a lot of tensions, ideological, political, economical of some sorts. We still have this mission of protecting the author in the ecosystem, and this is something that we are trying to work on.
Thank you very much, Corina. I recognize many of the developments, many of the explanations that Francois gave to us in the first part of this session. We stay in Timișoara, and we invite Dariana Pau to take the floor to explain what the Timișoara Architecture Biennale is and your role in the beta team.
It's really nice to meet you all, and it's really, really nice to see again Ed, Vita, and Francois. Yeah, so I'm the coordinator of Look at the City project, a project that's implemented and curated by Beta Team, the Biennial of Architecture here in Timișoara. We are a team of young architects that implement this biennial. We are part of or working from the Order of Architects here in Timișcanti. And yeah, as Teodora and Corina said, this program in Timișoara, the capital of culture, is spread through some chapters. Look at the City project is set in the places chapter of the bid book in living spaces. And we are doing this project from 2015. It started before the Capital of Culture. It started as a campaign, and I will share a very brief presentation. We implement this project. It's called Look at the City, or Privește orașul in Romanian. It started as a civic campaign. We tried to, in a way, let's say, we tried to raise some awareness about the public spaces in Timișoara. It started as a photographic campaign, and it soon developed in campaign where people realized the issues in the city, the issues of the public space. Afterwards, we tried to see what are the stories of the public space for each of Timișoara citizens, and some artists draw these beautiful illustrations of these stories that people send to us. And yeah, the project evolved in this way, trying to connect with the citizens, and also inviting the local artists to transport the stories into a more visual way. So I think this project is very well aligned with the theme of our session today, the community development through creative actions. We try to really get the citizens involved in this project through local artists. And we actually got in a phase during the pandemic when we didn't know, or we raised the question, what is public space for you now when you cannot access it? So we had a photographic campaign again, but it was also a contest, and people really got involved with it. But in 2016, this project became a part of the bid book, and yeah, it took the Capital of Culture program here in Timișoara took this project to another level. So we chose 6 spaces in the city. in these spaces we tried to, and we are still trying because we are at the third intervention. We tried to make an architectural temporary installation through which people can experience the space, the public space that is unused or neglected or unrecognized for its potential. First of all was the project we did at the train station, which was very well embraced by the community. You can see here a picture of some local group of dancers who came to see the installation and did a really nice ad hoc, let's say, dance there. In 2020, during the biennial, because we are doing it now in 2022, it was in 2020 and so on. In the past, we made an intervention in a public space in a historical neighborhood. We did this stage where theaters in the area made their shows because you were not allowed to do it inside. So we took the theaters and get them to do these shows outside for all the citizens. So we adapted this project in the situation that was happening. And last year we intervened in two of these spaces. It was a public space near a market, and the other one was a public space, an unused huge plot in the middle of a neighborhood, a communist neighborhood, which was unused, and we gave it another function so the community can gather there. This last project was actually also the most interesting one for us because we really get to work with the community. Some of the people living there coagulated in a group. They also made a proposal for this space to the city council, and we hope to help them more to develop this huge empty space into a park and a space that they can use to meet and function as a community, not only as citizens of the city. Yeah, this is our project that we do for ECoC here in Timișoara. We hope to develop it more in the following years. We have three more installations to come in the public space in Timișoara. And after that, we want to make a publication with our highs and lows during this project, because it was definitely, and it is, a very challenging project, because we came to this with this installation in the middle of very neglected, unused, and challenging spaces that people did not understand, but with cultural events that are accessible to them, like fairs or lunches together or discussions, they appropriate those spaces after our installations. Yeah. What I want to also say is that after the academic camp that was here in Timișoara, I got some more hope for this project, because I was saying we passed through some highs and lows, mostly lows, to say that, because it's hard to work with communities. But I think what stuck to me after that academic camp is that little or ordinary project, they have a major impact. It's something that develops slowly, but it can change people, and it can change how communities interact with these spaces. That culture, it's an investment. It's not just, and it's not a very fast, a fast way of working. And that behind communities or the spaces we chose, there are people who have emotions and other core values than we have, and we have to adapt and listen to the community we work with. Yeah, I don't know, maybe I was too short, I'm not sure, but that is our experience as architects working in this this project for Timișoara Capital of Culture. And it's the project we connect the most because it's something else that we are doing except the biennial, which is very, I'm not saying easy because it's not, but it's more accessible to us architects. We are talking to architects. We have a very good structure at the biennial, and we use it every year. But this Look at the City project is more challenging than the biennial, I would say.
Good. Let me now invite Irena Kregar-Segota from Rijeka. She was with us yesterday. She was the director, the chief executive officer of Rijeka 2020. And she's been involved in several programs of community development before she was appointed as director of the capital, during the capital. Now she's working with in the Croatian Ministry for Culture and Media, in the Department for the Development of Arts and Culture. Irena, you can share the screen. You will be allowed to present briefly your experience.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be with you again today. As Jordan introduced, prior to being CEO, I was director of the department, which, among other things, managed community projects, volunteering, capacity building, and a large number of other themes. So I would say I have this overall experience, really from bidding time to implementation, namely to evaluation of the year. I just put together a few slides with the key messages about community development and what we did. First of all, I would like to say that for us, it was really a transversal strategy from bidding to legacy. Like for all of you, I think it's very important to start thinking about community engagement and development from the beginning. And it's maybe one of the most important legacies that you will leave after your celebratory year. Stronger communities, better connected communities with bigger capacities are really guarantees that the culture and creativity will continue to develop in your city and your region. So just if we want to put it into categories, we designed community programs, really community-aimed tailored programs, so programs that were implemented and carried out in the communities and by the communities, and then also programs, cultural and artistic programs, where we involved community in a certain level of that activity. Another very important thing that we did from the very beginning is that we dedicated a physical space. We called it Rehab, Rijeka Hub, but also a rehabilitation a point that was really a hotbed for many of our programs. It was information center, it was cultural center, but it was what is very important, co-working space, not in the commercial meaning, but really co-working for all our partners. And also a meeting point for different communities who met there, designed their projects, worked with us. This space was used for different capacity building programs, presentation of the programs, etc., etc. And importantly, very important is that this space is alive today, functioning, and continues to work as a community hub. We, in 2018 and in 2019, so 2 years prior to 2020, we launched 2 campaigns that were named Participate, really with an exclamation mark, very general campaigns where we asked people to join us, but we also designed specific platforms, because if your campaign remain general, it's illusionary that you will involve everybody. So really, you need to do some kind of segmentation. You need to work with a very or rather strong focus. And I would say it's very useful if you have concrete tools or platforms to involve your communities. The slogan for us was, for our community programs, was active citizens in an active city. These activities were created to involve citizens in cultural and social events, but also to create capacity building for them, especially for informal civil societies, groups and individuals, so that they can be able to carry on, not just during 2020, but afterwards with their own programs. These 3 platforms were Green Wave, that was designed for the projects linked with ecology, climate change, everything that is green in the city, from small urban gardens to I don't know, putting plants on top of high-rising buildings, so very different kind, or dealing with water, which is a very hot topic in Rijeka. So all kind of green topics and green projects. Civil initiatives was more general, and it was aimed at cultural projects, but also with a very strong social component. So projects that always had to answer this question: which kind of problem are we solving in our community, and what is the added value of our project? Something very innovative, at least for us and for Rijeka and the region, was Citizen Council. The people in the Citizen Council were drawn. It was some kind of almost a lottery. They were drawn, they participated, and they really had the power to choose the projects and to have a decisive vote. So in terms of when it came to financing. So Rijeka 2020 as an agency, we really try to function there as a capacity building provider and a coordinator. I will give you now examples, some illustrative examples of the projects that we did. One of the most successful ones and really large in scope that was developed for several years and has numerous activities was called 27 Neighborhoods. I mentioned it yesterday when we talked about international cooperation because it had a very strong European component. We chose, we had a call for 27 neighborhoods or 27 communities. A neighborhood could be a part of a city or a small island or a mountain village in our region, which is very, very diverse. Usually the neighborhoods that were chosen were really demonstrating the strong need for projects that would gather people together, that would solve some problems. We had a neighborhood that had only like 10 inhabitants and really had to deal with that. So, and these neighborhoods were connected with 27 neighborhoods in each EU country. They developed their projects, and as I said, we helped with financing, coordinating, communication, also link them with artists, with professional artists to help to have to guarantee a high quality, high profile of the project. But they had a very, very strong voice and independent agency in that. Apart from activities that they did, each neighborhood also had what we call the living room, so a dedicated, specific, dedicated physical space where people in that neighborhood, in that community, could come ask for information, or not just on our program, on their program, but on all kind of questions that were relevant in their community. Another program that I would like to highlight was called the Porto Etno Festival, and it was its main topic was national diversity in Rijeka. We have more than 20 so-called traditional minorities. When I say traditional, I mean that we're in Rijeka for the last 100 or more years, but we also have a lot of newcomers as the world is changing around us. So we tried to gather these groups, these communities through food and music. We had the professional artistic layer of this program, but also a layer that was completely designed by different national groups that participated, and it was, as you can imagine, very joyful. We had a large Italian community that is in Rijeka, but we also had like 2 Thai cooks who just moved to Rijeka several years ago. Another interesting project, it's called Lungomare Art, and this was a project that brought contemporary art sculptures to different places on our coast and on islands. And through this project, we created a new cultural and touristic route. What is important for our topic is that we involve local communities in this. So the artists, prior to proposing contemporary art sculpture, artists stayed in the community for several months, worked with the community so that their works were really inspired by the needs, by all kind of different needs in the community. Also, the capacity building program that I mentioned already, which was not just for professionals, for cultural workers, but also really for representatives of informal groups, civil society groups, or individuals who were given all kind of knowledge, from fundraising to writing EU projects to communication to managing projects. And this is a really strong legacy, the knowledge that this program left behind. More than 3,000 people passed through their program, and I would say that at least 1/3 were representatives of informal civil society group. Volunteering program, of course, you all have your own, I imagine, volunteering program. It's a wonderful way to link with the community, to join the community, and to communicate about everything that you do through these dedicated individuals. And the final example I would like to give you is our link that we tried to connect with the business sector. So we incited the creation of an association that was called the Partneri, like partners, which gathered from individual businessmen to a smaller or larger company in Rijeka and in our region. The aim of this association was not purely philanthropic. So yes, they financed projects, but what is also very important is that we had regular meetings and talks between the cultural and artistic groups and their group, because we identified that there is a a lot of miscommunication going on, a lack of understanding. And I think these dialogues really help this business community have better insight into what we were trying to do. And what is important as a legacy, they continue with their own calls for financing cultural and creative projects. And this is really a unique initiative in Croatia. So I was asked to be rather short, succinct, but I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Irena, Vala. That was very complete. Very interesting projects. I would like to know more about all of them. And now we move to Kaunas. Ed, I'm really happy to see you and to invite you and Vita to take the floor to explain the context of your work in Sanjay, a neighborhood in Kaunas. You lead the community association of that neighborhood. And let me also, in order to introduce you, let me add that your program deserved a special mention of the jury in our award, the International Award Culture 21 UCLG Mexico City. And this was, if I remember well, in 2016. So congratulations for this international recognition. And now the floor is yours to explain where you are and what you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordi, and very nice to be with everyone here. It's nice to see some friends that we know and then to hear things from people we don't know. We're both artists, Ed and Vita, community artists, and we work in the place where we live. And indeed, it's interesting, you mentioned 2016, because in many ways that peer recognition was something that was very important for her work on the cabbage field, which was this public space that had gone into disrepair, a grey space, some people call it. It was unclear what its future would be. And in some ways, that recognition in 2016 was something that was very important to us at that time. And I think that's the first reflection I want to make on our work. We've been working maybe a decade of work here in our community, and it seems to me that one has to think in timeframes of decades rather than projects to understand this work in community. It seems to me that there's a problematic that we face in terms of, let's say, the frameworks of the European Capital of Culture, which is that very often the aperture by which the European Capital of Culture tries to work is from the framework of a project to be managed. And that from this type of project management aperture, then you get into this process of having a name, having a mission, having an objective, having a target, having a result, having a legacy. And these things always have to be produced within periods of maybe 12 months or 24 months, 36 months, and so on and so on. And for us, I think that a problematic is that we can't appear on that radar, project management aperture, because generally our work will only appear every 5 or 6 years and then disappear. And then will reappear 5 or 6 years later. So for instance, in 2016, we appear on the aperture that was really important to us. Let's say that it was recognized that the work on the cabbage field and this reclamation of public space was something that was important. But then that disappears and the work continues on without any appearance on anybody's radar. And then in 2022, it reappears and it jumps on a radar of ECoCs Capital of Culture, where we will perform our community opera that's been in production for 6 years. And that'll happen in early June, on the 9th and 10th of June. And then on the 11th of June, we move over into the new Bauhaus Awards, because our work in terms of a digital mapping process has also been recognized or shortlisted for a prize in New Bauhaus.
Very good.
So this is like, again, In 2022, this work appears. And then in 2023, and probably for 5 or 6 more years, it'll disappear off the radar. And so it seems to me we're not a unique phenomenon in terms of cultural practitioners who don't appear on the radar. Like we will never appear on the radar of the Lithuanian Culture Board in terms of cultural funding. I will never appear on the radar of Creative Ireland for cultural funding. I will never appear on the European Capital of Culture in CONUS for funding, because it has to appear within this aperture of the framework of project management. And it seems to me,
and the community work or the community artwork that we are practicing here, it's very hard to frame into this project terms and project time frame. So really, for someone who engages locally very deeply into cultural field, and it's a continuous work, this format of short inputs of even 3 years is a short input of a cultural capital. It doesn't fit really properly the community needs, because we do not operate on the project terms. We operate on our inner clock, inner framework, and so it's really we never fit Kona's capital of city, because we are not the project-based community. And that is a problem, I think, of the cultural capitals all around Europe. If it's not one project that shows the success, but it's something that is risky, that takes long time periods, that the outcomes are never clear, then cultural capitals have problems with such communities, because cultural capitals are targeted for successful projects, and community is never a guarantee for success, because it's an open source, it's an open frame, it's frame at all, and it's very hard to count the quantity of our success, hard to count the quantity even of the community members. So it's not fitting into the existing institutional frames. And so we have to say that even though CONUS is a capital of culture, this year we are not in that program. And we get recognitions from outside the country, but we are not really seen in our own city as a partner worth to showcase the cultural goals.
What you are saying, Vita, fits perfectly with the pending question that I raised to Francois. But Ed, you were about to complement, so please carry on. And later, I'll give, once you've finished, Francois will take the floor to reply to that question and to comment.
And then I suppose the second sort of general comment that I'd like to make is the idea that the community is an object and not the subject of cultural work. And for me, an awful lot of engagement with community asks the question, how do we address community? And I would like to flip that question around, and I would like to ask, how does community address you? You, the cultural practitioner, you, the cultural institution, you, the culture board of your country. How does a community address you? And in general, I would say that there are very few openings, there are very few interfaces for community to address backwards. It's never a problem if a cultural organization comes to a community and says, we have a program that we want to do. We have a group of 20 or 30 residents, artist residents, that we want to put into your community. And at the end of those 20 or 30 residents, we'll produce 20 or 30 exhibitions. And those 20 or 30 exhibitions will, further the career of the individual artists or practitioners who are involved in it. But where is the community used as a subject in and of its own right? And it seems to me this is where there is a radical departure being proffered by something like the Rome Charter, because I think it really creates a framework in which the question has been asked, when is the community creating? How is the community creating? What supports are there for the community to create? And the second thing I think that goes with this sense of culture and community as an object of culture rather than a subject of culture is the idea that in some ways the community is always something to be colonized, always something that has to find, culture has to go out towards it. Culture has to move into this periphery. And there's a huge underestimation, it seems to me, that culture is community, that there is a culture already existing, already alive, already thriving, already percolating within the cultural process that's already existing. Why? Because 2 or 3 or 4 or 500 people have decided to live in an area. They've decided to settle themselves into a particular landscape, into a particular natural ecology. And this already is the raw material that creates a culture. The historical landscape, the natural landscape, the cultural heritage, and the living lives of people where they are. And that's, it seems to me, where the living heritage was quite radical, is that it was acknowledging that culture is not something that needs to be brought into community, but it was something that is already there and is already existing and is already thriving. So these are the 2 points I think we want to frame it. We're not, I hope we don't communicate the idea of a victim. We don't feel like victims. No. We don't, it's just that we don't appear on this radar, and I don't know that we want to appear on the radar of the cultural infrastructure and the cultural sort of machine that is currently in operation, that puts such a big emphasis. I said it in my last presentation, the big emphasis on project management, and with that, every €3 that's spent, €3 gets spent on community. Over here, you know, advocating for the European Capital of Culture are the advisors who advise the European Capital of Culture or the people who are employed by the European Capital of Culture. €2 is then spent on administration and management and staffing of the European Capital of Culture, and €1 spent on the artistic process itself. I would really love to see a complete shift in that, from €3 to be spent on the artistic process and the mediation of that, €2 to be spent on the staffing and the type of mediation to make an engagement of communities show itself, and €1, please, to be spent on communication.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to see how concrete you go in the recommendations, and let me make a parallel to my city, to Barcelona, because I've advocated for similar measures quantitatively to take place in the main cultural organizations of Barcelona, similar to what you are saying. Francois, pending question on the evaluation of participatory art, the frames that allow that evaluation. If you can make it brief, because we would like to open the floor to everybody, and then and including Christina, who has arrived to her office safe. We are happy that you are safe at the office. Francois, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jordi. Let me connect it to something that Ed has just said. He used a hard word talking about the cultural sector thinking that it has to colonize communities. And it is a hard word to talk in that way, but it's also true. One of the paradoxes of the community work is that it often comes with an expectation, not only from within the cultural sector, but from those who finance it and from politicians, that there should be some social outcome from the cultural work that you do with communities, as opposed to my position, which is that it's a human right. We don't make the same expectation of audiences who go to the theatre or to the opera or to galleries. And I think asking questions about why we make such different assumptions about community work and about other cultural work raises some uncomfortable questions about how we see our fellow citizens. Be that as it may, the expectation that community work should be evaluated comes because of this expectation that it has a social purpose. I think that I was one of the people that first began to work on evaluation of social projects 25 and 30 years ago. And I think that a lot of that early work has been misunderstood. And we now have a situation where the evaluation of community projects can often be quite problematic. It's more, in reality, it's more about trying to justify the relatively small amounts of money that are spent on social cultural projects or community cultural projects. I think evaluation is really important. You can't be creative without evaluating. As soon as an artist makes a mark or plays a note or makes a gesture, they are unconsciously and sometimes consciously comparing their performance with their intention, which is all that evaluation is trying to do. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong or difficult even about evaluating projects. The question is, why are you doing it? If you're doing it to improve your performance, to learn from your experience, to make the next project richer, better, more successful, then I think you're doing it for the right reasons. If you're doing it simply because a funder is requiring you to answer certain questions set by the funder, then I think you're much more in this uncomfortable logic of saying that somehow poor people have to justify their access to cultural funds by being better poor people, whereas middle-class people are allowed simply to have their cultural funding without any strings attached. When we spoke in Timisoara, I gave a little presentation about ways of evaluating and some of the mistakes that people fall into and the ways of avoiding them. And I won't repeat all that here. You'll find it both in the materials from the Timisoara Academy camp and in the report. But I think the real thing that I would say, the important thing I would say is, if you're required to evaluate, ask yourself what the purpose of that evaluation is and how can it benefit your work and the people who are, in the end, the taxpayers for all the work that we do. How is it going to help them?
That was very good, Francois. Good question to end, and also brilliant explanation of the contexts of evaluation. Christina, you had a question?
Thank you very much. Yes, the question, well, actually, it was more a sort of thought that I had when I was hearing the brilliant speech of Francois this morning. And I was sort of reconnecting it to what Sylvia was saying yesterday about the balance between the local level and the international level within an ECoCs program. So my question, my thought to be discussed with Francois is exactly about this issue of balancing community level and local level, let's say, and international level. How do you think this is possible when we talk about participatory art or community art. I heard your very clever and clear distinction between the two, but let's talk about both concepts together. How do you think they could be framed, both at local and international level, within the program of an ECoC?
When you say how could they be framed, can you explain a bit more what you mean?
Well, I think the assumption when we talk about participatory art and community art is that it is something that can happen only in engaging local communities. So how do we, well, let's say, balance this with the international part of an ECoC program? Maybe it's clearer like that.
It seems to me that implicit in your question, but I don't mean that you think this, but that there is implicitly the idea that the cultural, that local community culture is inevitably lacking ambition, of limited interest to anyone except in that immediate neighborhood. And that there are still a lot of prejudices and assumptions about what community work can be. But as I said, you know, everyone, Ed, I hope will forgive me for this cliche about Irish culture, but everyone who visits Ireland loves the idea of stopping and going into a pub and finding people playing music there and being invited to sit down and enjoy that. In a sense, there is something profoundly valuable for all of us to be invited into someone else's real culture as opposed to the culture that they put on for the world. And so I think we should not have that hesitation. Of course, we need to understand that there are things that are designed really for a local audience where you have to be local to even understand what's happening, because the references and so on are so much embedded in that community. But there's lots of other things that can be that can be shared. And when I talk about participatory art and the way that it's changed, I often use a picture of the London 2012 Olympic Games opening ceremony, because it was quite, in some ways, it was quite a shocking moment for me, because essentially when London had the eyes of the world upon it for an evening, what did it decide to do? It put on a community play about things like the National Health Service that nobody outside England, outside the UK, understands or cares about. It was extraordinary. And yet it was a beautiful moment, and it involved 3,000 non-professional artists, as well as Paul McCartney and all the famous people. So I think those two extremes, from you know, the authenticity of being invited to join in somebody's own culture, to finding ways of saying, yes, we can put participatory art on this world stage if we just have the resources to do it, and the ambition and the ideas and the artists who can make that happen. I think all of those things are possible. The biggest barrier is often our own assumptions about what can and should be done.
That was nice. I also liked what you say, Francois, is very much connected to what Ed said on the cycles, or on the timing of the work that communities do at a local level. They stay in the place, and they know what happened in the past, and they want to stay in the future and create meaning together for the future. And this is not always matching the timing set by institutions. Francois.
Just a quick comment. One of the other assumptions that we sometimes make is that communities only want to do things about themselves. Communities can want an exciting moment that is all from outside, that opens new possibilities just as much as anything else. There is room for everything. There's room for spectacle, there's room for excitement, there's room for very intimate and local. The key thing is only to be working with people and listening to them and finding where their heart is and what they want to be doing now.
As I was listening to all of you, first of all, thank you so much. Thank you so much for a really wonderful conversation. This is another session of this Academy Camp that wants to pull together what has been done concretely on themes that were identified as relevant by the European Capitals of Culture in terms of their needs for capacity building. And they have been 4 independent different academy camps, but I already had the feeling yesterday afternoon, but the conversation with Francois and all of you today has confirmed it. Yes, it is about different themes, but they are all somehow connected. There is a thread. And I think that as we move on through these 4 sessions, we're seeing this. And I think that this is what we had in mind, Jordi, when we talked about, this Academy Camp with you. I'm really very, very pleased that it is actually happening. So see you later. Thank you so much, Francois, and all the rest of you that have so generously shared your time with us today.